Welcome back to Seek Strength, and welcome back to Pro Homer S&C Coaches React, Act Accordingly. No, I'm joking, that's an insider. That's a joke that I hope no one gets.
I hope for your sake you don't get that joke.
Today we're doing S&C Coaches React to a thrower. Throwers are once again at it. They've got some of the best S&C, and to be honest, as far as I'm concerned, if you are at a loss what to do with your training, just copy some thrower.
Just do what a thrower's doing.
Doesn't matter what sport you're doing.
If you want to be bigger, stronger, faster, more powerful and more impressive,
Yeah.
probably just copy your local thrower.
Yeah.
In this case, we talk about throwers being, they're at it again, you know. They're making fools of big weights. They're throwing around the weights. They're making weightlifters feel bad, powerlifters feel bad. Vanessa makes everyone feel bad.
So today we're doing Vanessa Kamga. She is a Swedish discus thrower, and you should watch a video of her throwing because she is fucking yeeting that discus away. So in relation to her best performance, it's 60.33 meters. And you know, it's funny when you go and look at the performance and look at the stats and what's the best discus throw, for example, and you see the world records are still for East Germans from like the 60s and stuff, which is ludicrous given obviously the circumstances and the lack thereof of any form of drug testing. But Vanessa has quite a lot of S&C on her Instagram, so she's picked a couple of different things that are worth going through in relation to throwing. And we'll start with probably what's considered, from our point of view, one of the more unique things, or one of the more special cases, I think is probably a good way of putting this, is the snatch, or in her case only seem to do hang snatches, which is perfectly appropriate. So we've got some hang power snatches here first, and we've also got some hang full snatches up to close to 100 kilos. I'm not sure if she ever hit the 100 kilo mark. She talked about it, but I didn't see a video. But she is moving, 75 kilo hang power snatches here for a triple, for example.
Yeah, so Owen talks about this being a unique case. You won't have seen too many snatches for any of the male throwers we've done S&C reaction videos to so far. Vanessa has very good positions here.
Yep.
So with most of those male throwers, they're going to be super restricted overhead, or they could be very restricted overhead. Vanessa has none of those restrictions. Like you'll see, obviously we don't see things like ankle mobility here because they're power snatches, but you see the ability to go through the full range of motion, very stable, very, very powerful. And in that case, when you can hit those positions, power snatch, or the hang power snatch in this case, becomes a really good training tool.
Yeah, the power snatch for most athletes, but in particular throwers, would be a nice to have, would make certainly plenty of sense, but unfortunately just most times just wouldn't be feasible given the extra fatigue in the shoulders, the mobility required. Generally you'll see a lot of throwers are not internally rotated, but just due to the nature of them being gorillas, don't really have that natural ability to hold the barbell overhead in a comfortable position like we're seeing with Vanessa here. So in those scenarios, it's usually you've got sore shoulders already, you don't want to be adding extra fatigue, and for an exercise that, if it's already causing issues, isn't going to benefit you a whole lot if you can't do it comfortably and consistently with good technique. But however, in Vanessa's case, it makes perfect sense. So the big thing we always talk about with the Olympic lifts for athletes is that they're nice to have, they're super productive if you can do them, but they're not needed. You don't have to have them. They're highly specialized. They take a lot of good coaching to get right. They take a good coach who knows what they're doing. They get dedicated athletes to want to put in sufficient time and dedication to improving the technique of those lifts to get a major benefit out of them. And then you have to do all that for long enough to get to a certain weight to give you actual benefit on your power training.
One thing, as we're still on this video before we move on, one thing where you can kind of see just how refined the motor pattern is, just how much work Vanessa has probably put into the snatch or the Olympic lifts in general, just look at her foot movement here. So commonly, or in normal technique, you'd want feet going from pulling position to a catching position, then back in again if you're doing multiple reps. You see here, very crisp foot movement, so no donkey kick. She's not kind of barely moving the feet out. The feet are going to the exact same position every time. Then in the recovery, as she brings the bar back down, those feet come back together to that pushing position or pulling position. It's very, very good, very crisp technique.
Now, obviously, one of the major benefits of the hang snatch is going from a highly explosive contracted position to relaxed, like we talk about, that most sports, pretty much all sports, benefit from the need to go from a contracted to relaxed position as fast as possible. So going from that peak wave to that trough as quickly as possible to do high volumes of movement in a fast time or short period of time. One of the great things about snatches is, of course, it trains that ability because you're contracting the extension and then relaxing to get underneath the barbell. But if snatches aren't causing any major dysfunction or issue in the shoulders or the wrist, for example, if they're not hurting you, they're actually relatively low fatigue for the power training you get. So if you were to do weighted jumps, a lot of plyometrics, they're generally quite fatiguing. But once you get over the initial beginner stage of snatches, they can be done relatively consistently or frequently in an athlete's training because of the minor fatigue you get with them if you're doing them appropriately for power. So if we're doing snatches for power, we don't need to do maximal snatches. We just need to do heavy-ish snatches. Now, what does heavy-ish mean? It might mean 75% of your 1RM. It might mean 80% of your 1RM. Now, of course, you're going to be pushing the weights over the course of your career, but you're not going to be pushing them like a weightlifter would, for example. So you're going to stick at those 75% weights, and any weightlifters watching will know that those weights are relatively, essentially a technique day, but those technique weights are perfect for that kind of power production given enough proficiency with the snatch.
I just want to say something as well, that if you're training in a gym with that snowy background in the windows behind you, that is so pleasing.
Yeah. Now, moving on, we have one of the other variants of the Olympic lift that we see throwers more routinely using, but not as much, is the full clean. So generally, we always see the hang power clean being one that throwers throw enormous weights around, in the region of 190 to 220 kilos in some instances. So we have Vanessa here with a full clean from the ground, no straps, which you typically see throwers using all the time, which is straps.
Yeah, I think in Vanessa's case here, you'll see probably some of the reasons you wouldn't want to use straps as a thrower.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly in this case, Vanessa's going for a full catch position, not that kind of high power position. And just if you are a thrower, or if you're a rugby player, soccer player or something, doing those kind of power cleans, when you're going for these full cleans and you're catching down the bottom, you see a lot of the time those catch positions aren't ideal. You'll see in Vanessa's case here, the hands kind of come in a small bit, the elbows come in a small bit, she loses position a tiny bit. And that really is the perfect reason not to ever use straps when you're doing them. So if you're at risk of maybe it being a non-ideal position in the bottom, you really should stay away from straps. And I wonder if that's why she's not using the classic textbook straps here.
Yeah, we do see them on some of our lifts from the cleans using straps, but I would implore you, if you are an athlete doing full cleans in your training, learn or practice a couple of cleans where you fall backwards with the clean and just don't be surprised by what happens, because it can happen sometimes, and you don't want that to happen with your maximum clean. You don't want it to happen with your time and a half body weight or 1.2 times body weight on your wrists. So learn to bail backwards and then learn what it feels like to miss a clean forwards, as it is very, very important to have that skill, and you don't want it to happen the first time. You don't want to pop your cherry on bailing a clean when it's coming down all on your forearms. So on top of the use of the clean and the snatch, we also have a lot of jerks, which obviously conceptually make a lot of sense again for a thrower if you don't have shoulder mobility issues, if you don't have a lot of potential, inflammation of the shoulders from fatigue. And again, jerks are relatively low fatigue in comparison to some other things that might be training power, like sprinting or jumping, back squats maybe, even full cleans, for example. The jerks are largely not fatigue free, of course they're not, but they are very low on that scale in terms of return for buck. Return for power, return for training.
Bang for your buck.
Bang for your jerk.
Very nice jerk technique here, to be fair.
135 kilos.
Yeah, really, really nice. I assume Vanessa, I'm just going to make this assumption because that's what a lot of other, around somewhere between 70 and 80 kilos body weight, even though it's hard to know, but a lot of throwers tend to sit around there. So 135 kilos is insanely heavy. You're approaching double body weight for behind the neck jerk. Very, very nice positions here again. I think behind the neck jerks just makes so much more sense for throwers or for athletes in general.
Yeah.
The position is better. That drive is so much more vertical. You can be more aggressive with your dip and drive. Things don't have to be perfect in the dip and drive. You have more margin for error front to back. I really like the behind the neck jerk for the athletes.
Yeah, a lot of times weightlifters won't like behind the neck jerks, or they won't be applicable because they might not necessarily transfer over to the jerk from the front, or when weightlifters do them, it might be infrequently. So when they're doing a behind the neck jerk, it feels pretty terrible. And a lot of times then they're left with, oh, did these even do anything? But when it comes to throwers or any athlete doing S&C work for behind the neck jerks, it's literally a case of how heavy can I get this overhead, coupled with the consideration of how safely can I get this overhead and hold it there. And then essentially you're going to get to very, very heavy weights. Arguably, if you train all of the Olympic lifts or variations, this is probably the one where you're going to get the heaviest weights overhead, or the heavy weights moving over a relative distance as fast as possible. And the throwers, of course, who are looking to launch things at not overhead angle per se, but at arm's length, it is something that is quite useful without being super specific in the gym. So the behind the neck jerk is definitely a good idea. Would you do this for your sprinters? Would you do this for your wrestlers, jiu-jitsu athletes? No, this is not going to feature that much really.
Big, strong power athletes is what you need that for.
So here's just a 120 from blocks. They look like an elite level weightlifter's behind the neck jerk. Superb.
Also, 130 kilos.
Yeah.
Like, the weights are not insignificant.
Fuck no. Then we've got what would be more traditional strength training, which is some bench pressing. So we've got 120 kilos. So this is obviously a men's bar for the bench press. And like we talked about a lot, strength training is fundamental for power production. It's a quote unquote half of the proverbial training equation for power production. You know, you will find it very hard to go beyond a certain power production capacity if you don't have a basis of strength, and if you're not trying to improve your strength to a certain level, unless you're elite level athlete. For most people, being stronger will absolutely make a difference, and this isn't kind of this isn't a theory based in like meathead S&C. It's fundamental kind of muscle physiology. It's well researched. It's very, very interesting. We've done other videos on that if you want to go look for them. But in this case, benching is one of the heaviest ways you can move weight for the upper body that doesn't involve kind of the momentum or the lower body being involved for overhead work or arm's length work.
Speaking of arm's length, Vanessa seems to have incredibly long arms.
Yeah.
She's gripped out to nearly the edge of the rack on each side. Mm-hmm. And when it comes down to the bottom position, when it's at her chest, it doesn't look like this kind of crazy, weird, like IPF competition bench press, you know? Like, still a massive range of motion. But I know, even if my grip was out there and I have quite long arms, that would be a quite wide bench press for me.
Yeah, it'd be a cheater bench press for you.
Yeah.
No, this is a full range of motion press. Like, it looks appropriate, the grip length.
Crazy.
So, coupled with that then, we have Vanessa seems to fucking love split squats. And we see this mostly with rugby players and throwers. 135 kilo split squat for reps, no support, no reared wheelie back foot support thing, no hands on a bar in front of her like a spider split squat, just literally barbell split squats from the rack. Great technique.
It's the stability on these for me is the big thing to watch. No major side to side shuffling. Most of the time we see athletes doing very, very heavy split squats. There is quite a lot of instability there.
Yes.
And they kind of get through it and they power through it. Like, even as they stand up out of the hole, you'll see that kind of flutter in the front knee, but they're so strong and so powerful they'll get through it. These look like at any point you could ask her to stop and she'd be able to stop.
Yeah.
Which you can't say that for any of the heavier split squats we've looked at, really.
Seeing all the heavy split squats recently, especially from throwers, has kind of made me want to do heavy split squats as well. I probably won't, but it's made me think about it. So one of the more interesting parts, or one kind of the more emerging research in terms of S&C or maybe biomechanics or muscle physiology, is the conundrum of unilateral imbalances that are innate in an athlete that may be trained, and whether they lead to injuries or if they lead to decreased performance. So what seems to be emerging and seems to be a consensus across the research, and I think it'll take a bit more time before we see a more definitive answer, but from what a lot of the research seems to suggest, is that outside a certain level of imbalance, whether that be with mobility or strength, is that you're more likely to see decreased performance and you're more likely to see an injury in one of the limbs involved. So in these cases, you know, whether that be 10% more strength on one side or 10% more degrees of mobility on one side, you may end up seeing more injuries. So as a professional athlete, obviously getting injured is terrible for your career. Unilateral training only makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly in a sport like throwing where you are training one side constantly over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Even though both sides were involved, even though both sides are involved in that kind of circular pattern, you're still really overtraining one side. So I definitely think it's something like throwing, it's going to be massive.
Then we move on to some bar squats. So we don't always see throwers doing just full range of motion squats. A lot of times we'll see them do box squats, which do make good sense for throwers. But Vanessa seems to favour or seems to frequently use full depth squats or unsupported squats. So we see her doing 165 here for sets of 5. But we also have a video of her hitting 190, which is from 5 weeks ago. So I think there's a good chance that is her PB. So 190 kilo back squats. We'll just have a look at that. Obviously, squat strength makes a huge pile of sense for our throwers.
My God, that's an impressive squat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
This is yet another instance of throwers making fools of weights.
Yeah. So like the bench press or like other strength training, the squat is obviously incredibly important for a thrower in terms of power production, increasing strength and looking to increase that level of strength as much as possible to increase our potential for power, which we would do then through our sport or maybe sports or power production training. And this 190 kilos is obviously moving very, very well. A lot of times we talk about you want to lift heavy weights, but you also really want to lift heavy weights fast if at all possible in training. So at some stage we'll need to grind a little bit, but most of the time for our training, especially for athletes looking to be powerful or fast, is heavy weights fast. Now heavy weights is both relative to you, but also just super heavy weights in terms of absolute terms.
And that's a kind of perfect argument as well for something we'll be constantly asked pretty much on a couple of times every week basis is, why should I wear weightlifting shoes, knee sleeves or a belt or wrist straps if I'm just training for my sport? So we get it asked a lot by kind of jiu-jitsu athletes or grapplers. We get asked a lot by rugby players and field sports athletes and by track and field people. And they're saying, I'm just trying to get stronger. These are facilitative influences. So wearing a belt allows you to lift more, wearing knee sleeves allows you to lift more. Why should I do that if I just want to get stronger? I should be using the kind of purest form of the stimulus. Owen talking there about moving those heavyweights fast and being able to get up to those heavyweights really is vitally important. So we're not saying everyone should go around wearing a squat suit when they're doing squats for a discus thrower, but certainly the utilization of something like a powerlifting belt and some knee sleeves can help those top end numbers to increase, and more importantly it can allow those top end numbers to move a bit quicker as well. And obviously the weightlifting shoes will help with positions, but also those positions will allow those heavier weights to move faster.
So then we have the kind of third of the big three, which is conventional deadlifts. Obviously posterior strength is massively important for the throwing, for discus throwing. So hip stability, lower back strength, glutes, hamstrings, massively important in terms of force transfer. Now, last week we would have talked about the 200 meter sprinter Noah Lyles doing some deadlifts, and we were saying that it might not necessarily be that useful, or there might be better options available. However, for throwers, if at all possible, frequent or consistent heavy deadlifts would be a very, very useful exercise to have in a program.
She does a great job of keeping her knees and her quads in the race here on those deadlifts.
Yeah, so for 175 by 5.
Yeah, I'm positive she'd be able to deadlift over 200 kilos, but these are very, very nice deadlifts.
Yeah, very consistent deadlifts.
Yeah.
Very nice back angle, no major changes in flexion, not really hitching. So we have 190 kilos here for a triple. Mixed grip at straps is actually quite interesting. It's rare you see that.
Yeah, very rare.
So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any athletes you'd like us to react to, or anyone you've seen that you thought would be quite interesting to see how they train, and you know they've enough or significant enough amount of training material on their social medias or somewhere online, please let us know and we'll be happy to check them out. Today's video, of course, is brought to you by Sika Sleep. This is our newest in our first in our supplement range, which is focused primarily on your sleep. Why does it help you get better sleep? Because it contains some of the most important nutrients you need to get to sleep. So no mushrooms, no hormones, no melatonin, just micronutrients that are featured in your diet that help you get better and longer and hopefully deeper sleep, and some funky dreams with that. So you can get that at seekastrength.com. You can buy a once-off purchase, or you can get a subscription for a discount and a 30-day supply. Thanks for watching, guys.